Welcome back, everyone. For today's deep dive, we're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of people are curious about: how to become fluent in English.
Yeah, definitely.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at this really cool guide that we found called How a Beginner Can Start Their English-Speaking Journey from Scratch to Fluency.
Oh, nice.
By the end of this deep dive, I'm hoping that all of you listening will have not only a better understanding of the steps to take to become fluent, but also some really good tips you can start using today to improve your English.
Yeah, I mean, one of the coolest things about this guide is it gets to the heart of why English matters in the first place. It really emphasizes that fluency isn't just about, just memorizing a bunch of vocabulary words.
Yeah.
But it's about actually feeling comfortable and confident communicating in English on a global scale.
Absolutely. And I know for me, that's always been one of the things that I've struggled with when I've tried to learn new languages, just feeling like I can actually use it. So I'm really kind of to jump into this guide and see what kind of advice it has.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start with just the basics.
Yeah, sounds good.
Why is English considered to be so important these days?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much, become the most used language for business, for travel, even for interacting with people online. It's kind of the lingua franca these days.
Yeah.
So being able to speak English fluently can really open up a lot of doors and opportunities around the world, whether you're thinking about working abroad or going to school in another country or just connecting with people from different cultures.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty huge asset to have.
Yeah. And I know for me, one of the things that always trips me up when I'm learning a language is grammar. Just all the rules, and sometimes it just feels so overwhelming.
Right.
I'm curious, does this guide offer any tips for tackling English grammar? Are there any quick wins that people can focus on?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it actually points out that, one thing that trips a lot of beginners up are articles A and the.
Yes.
Yeah. Those little words can be tricky.
They are.
But it suggests that, you should really try to understand when to use each one based on whether a noun is specific or general.
Okay.
So for example, you would say, I want to buy a book. If you're just talking about any book, but you'd say, I want to buy the book that you recommended if you're talking about a specific one.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think those articles have always been a bit of a mystery to me, so that's actually really helpful.
Glad to hear it.
So beyond grammar, what are some of the other building blocks that this guide focuses on?
So it basically breaks down the path to fluency into these three core elements: pronunciation, vocabulary, and of course grammar.
Yeah.
And what I think is really cool is that it really highlights how interconnected all of these elements are.
Yeah, you can have a huge vocabulary, but if your pronunciation isn't clear, people might not understand you.
It's true.
And, even if you have perfect grammar, but you don't know enough words, you're not going to be able to express yourself very well.
It's like having all the ingredients for an amazing meal, but then not knowing how to cook it properly.
Exactly. It's all about putting all the pieces together
to
create something delicious.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Speaking of vocabulary, though, what are some of the techniques that this guide recommends for, expanding your word bank?
Yeah, because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is just how to learn new vocabulary effectively.
Totally. And this guide dives into a ton of different methods.
Oh, wow.
But one that I think is super effective is this idea of spaced repetition.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
I have heard of it, but I've never actually tried it myself.
Oh, interesting.
I've always been a little bit intimidated by it. Because it seems like it would take a lot of time to set up.
Yeah, I get that.
With flashcards and stuff.
Yeah, there is a little bit of upfront work.
Yeah.
But the payoff can be huge.
Okay.
So basically, spaced repetition is all about reviewing words at specific intervals based on how well you remember them.
Okay.
And there are tons of apps out there that can help you do this, like Anki, which is actually my personal favorite.
Oh, cool.
It basically takes all the guesswork out of it.
Okay.
It schedules your reviews for you.
Nice.
And it really helps to move those words from your short-term memory into your long-term memory.
So it's kind of like a personal trainer for your vocabulary.
Exactly. It's like having a coach that's constantly pushing you to improve.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
So it sounds like that spaced repetition is really effective.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any other approaches that this guide suggests for vocabulary building? Because I know, like, flashcards aren't for everybody.
Oh, for sure. There are a ton of other ways to learn new words.
Oh.
And the guide also emphasizes the importance of learning vocabulary in context.
Oh, okay.
So rather than just like memorizing isolated words from a list, you should try to focus on learning phrases and sentences.
Okay, so like how would you actually do that?
Well, like for instance, instead of just learning the word, apple, you could learn the phrase, I would like to eat an apple.
Oh, okay.
This will help you understand the word's meaning and how to use it naturally in a sentence.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's all about seeing how words work together in real life situations.
It's kind of like, learning a dance move. Like it's much easier to remember if you see it done in a sequence rather than just trying to isolate the movement itself.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And I think, another thing that a lot of people find helpful is just like surrounding themselves with the language as much as possible.
Oh, yeah. Immersion is huge.
Yeah, like I personally love listening to music in other languages or podcasts. Does this guide touch on how listening can actually help with fluency?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole section dedicated to listening comprehension.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just the usual advice of like watch movies and listen to music.
Yeah.
It really stresses the difference between active and passive listening.
Oh, I'm actually really curious about that because I feel like I've heard those terms before, but I'm not entirely sure what they mean.
Yeah, it's a good distinction to make.
Yeah, could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
What does this guide say about active versus passive listening?
Sure. So passive listening is basically what we do when we have English playing in the background while we're doing something else, like cooking or driving. You're not really actively focusing on what you're hearing.
Right.
But it's still good for getting used to the sounds of the language and just kind of absorbing it passively.
Yeah.
Active listening, on the other hand, is about intentionally focusing on understanding the meaning of what you're hearing.
Yep.
So this could involve like listening to a podcast and taking notes, or watching a show with subtitles and trying to repeat certain phrases.
Gotcha.
So it's really about engaging with the language on a deeper level.
Yeah, so it's not just letting it wash over you.
Right.
It's about actively trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, and this guide suggests starting with passive listening.
Oh, okay.
And then gradually incorporating more active listening as your comprehension improves.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, does the guide suggest any specific exercises or activities that people can do to improve their listening skills?
Oh, it has a ton.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, one that I really like is called shadowing.
Okay.
And that's basically where you try to mimic the speaker's pronunciation and intonation in real time.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great way to work on your pronunciation and to just get more comfortable with the rhythm of the language.
It's like you're kind of becoming the speaker yourself.
Exactly. You're stepping into their shoes and trying to sound just like them.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a fun challenge.
And I imagine that would be really helpful for getting over any kind of fear or hesitation that you might have about speaking.
Oh, absolutely. It forces you to get out of your comfort zone and just start producing the sounds.
Yeah, because I think, speaking is probably the most intimidating part of language learning for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure.
Myself included. Like, I tend to get really nervous and just freeze up when I'm trying to speak another language.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Does this guide offer any advice for overcoming that fear of speaking?
It does, and it actually acknowledges that speaking is usually the most challenging aspect of language learning, especially for beginners.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things it emphasizes is to start small.
Okay.
Like, don't expect to be fluent overnight. Just focus on making gradual progress and celebrating those small wins along the way.
That's a really good point, because I think sometimes we set these unrealistic expectations for ourselves.
Yeah.
And then we get discouraged when we don't see results immediately.
Exactly. It's all about being patient with yourself and just enjoying the process.
So it's like building confidence through consistent practice.
Exactly. Like, the guides just starting with simple greetings and questions like, hello, how are you? Or, excuse me, where's the bathroom? And you can practice these in front of a mirror or with a language partner.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's about building up those basic conversational skills before tackling more complex interactions.
Right, so you're kind of laying the foundation.
Exactly. You got to start with the basics.
Yeah, and then once you have that foundation, you can start building on it.
Right, and as you progress, the guide recommends role-playing common scenarios.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Like, ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even ask a friend or family member to help you practice.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a fun way to make learning more interactive.
And I think it's a good way to kind of take the pressure off, too.
Totally. It's like you're rehearsing for a play.
Exactly.
So that when you're in a real-life situation, you feel more prepared.
Yeah, and I think, another thing that can be really helpful is just trying to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible.
Oh, immersion is key.
Yeah, like I've heard of people who have changed their phone settings to English or who only watch English movies and TV shows.
Yeah, all of that helps.
Does this guide say anything about how effective those kinds of immersion techniques actually are?
It actually addresses that directly.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it acknowledges that immersion isn't like a magic bullet.
Right.
But it does highlight its power in accelerating fluency.
Okay.
It basically points out that the more you surround yourself with English, the more you'll internalize the sounds, the rhythms, and the patterns of the language.
So it's like you're creating a mini English-speaking environment for your
Oh, exactly. You're constantly exposing yourself to the language, which helps your brain to absorb it more naturally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the best part is that immersion doesn't have to be expensive or time-consuming.
Right.
It can be as simple as reading English news articles online or listening to English podcasts while you commute.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's all about finding ways to integrate English into your daily routine.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this guide so far, is that it's not just about, sitting down and studying grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary lists.
Right.
It's about finding ways to make English a part of your life.
Exactly. It's about making it a habit.
And I think that's what ultimately leads to fluency.
I agree.
So it's not just about learning the language, but about living the language.
Well said. Right, and as you become more comfortable with the basics, the guide actually encourages you to start challenging yourself with more advanced materials.
Okay, so what kind of materials are we talking about here?
Well, it suggests things like, novels.
Oh, wow. So jumping right into reading full-length books.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just articles, podcasts, documentaries, stuff that's going to really stretch your comprehension skills.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because it's easy to get stuck in a rut when you're learning a language.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of find a level that you're comfortable with, and then you just stay there.
Right, you got to keep pushing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You got to keep pushing yourself to improve.
Yeah. And the guide also recommends exploring different English accents and dialects.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, because, English is spoken all over the world.
Right.
And there's so much variation.
Yeah, and it can be really tough to understand someone who has a very strong accent.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Especially if you're not used to it.
Yeah, so it's definitely a good idea to expose yourself to as many different accents as possible.
Yeah, it'll make you a more well-rounded English speaker for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, does this guide actually talk about how to go about learning different accents and dialects?
Yeah, it does actually. It suggests listening to podcasts or watching movies that feature speakers from different regions.
So you can kind of train your ear to pick up on the subtle differences.
Yeah, exactly. And it also mentions that you shouldn't get too caught up in trying to perfectly imitate every accent.
Right.
It's more about just being able to understand them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I think sometimes people get really intimidated by the idea of having to sound like a native speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of lose sight of the fact that the goal is just to be able to communicate effectively.
Right. Communication is key.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about perfection, it's about connection.
Well said.
Speaking of which, we talked earlier about how speaking can be really intimidating for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. It's a big hurdle for sure.
Yeah, and I'm curious if this guide offers any additional advice for people who are struggling to overcome that fear of speaking.
It does. It actually has a whole section on building confidence.
Right.
And one of the things it suggests is to start with something called self-talk.
Self-talk.
Yeah, basically it's about talking to yourself in English.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it might sound a little strange.
Yeah.
But it's actually a really effective way to get more comfortable with the sounds of the language.
Okay.
And to practice forming sentences without the pressure of having an audience.
So it's like a way to kind of warm up your vocal cords.
Yeah, exactly. And it also helps to boost your confidence because you're not worried about making mistakes in front of other people.
So you can just experiment and play around with the language?
Yeah, exactly. And as you get more comfortable with self-talk, you can start to incorporate it into other areas of your life.
Okay, so how would you do that?
Well, for example, you could try thinking to yourself in English throughout the day.
Oh, interesting.
Or narrating your actions as you're doing them.
Like, I am walking to the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Or I am making a cup of coffee.
I like that.
It might feel a little silly at first.
Yeah.
But it really helps to make English a more integral part of your daily routine.
Right. It's about kind of training your brain to think in English.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the easier it will become. Yeah, for sure. And, we talked earlier about immersion and finding ways to surround yourself with the language. Does this guide offer any specific tips for creating an immersive environment at home?
Oh, absolutely. It's got a ton of ideas.
Oh, great.
One that I think is really cool is to actually label things around your house with their English names.
Oh, that's a fun idea.
Yeah, like you could put a sticky note on your refrigerator that says refrigerator, or one on your door that says door.
Okay.
It sounds simple, but it's a really effective way to constantly expose yourself to new vocabulary.
Yeah, and it kind of turns your home into a giant English learning playground.
Exactly. You're learning without even realizing it.
I love that, and I bet it would be especially helpful for visual learners.
Oh, for sure, because you're associating the words with the actual objects.
Yeah. What are some other tips that the guide gives for creating an immersive environment?
Well, it also recommends things like, changing the language settings on your phone and computer to English.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that way you're constantly seeing English, even when you're not actively studying.
Right. It just becomes a part of your everyday life.
Exactly. And it also suggests listening to English music and podcasts, watching English movies and TV shows, reading English books and articles, just surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of that is that it doesn't really feel like work.
Right. It's just about enjoying yourself.
Yeah, you're just doing things that you already enjoy, but you're doing them in English.
Exactly. And in the process, you're picking up new words and phrases.
Yeah, and you're getting more comfortable with the language.
It's a win-win.
It is a win-win. I think a lot of people struggle with staying motivated when they're learning a language.
Oh, yeah. It's a common challenge for sure.
Yeah. Does this guide offer any advice for staying on track and keeping that momentum going?
It does. It actually emphasizes the importance of setting realistic goals and breaking down those goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
So instead of saying I want to be fluent in English,
right,
you might say I want to be able to hold a basic conversation in English by the end of the month.
Exactly. Something specific and achievable.
Yeah. And that way you're not setting yourself up for disappointment.
Right. And it also suggests finding a language partner or joining a language exchange group.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because having someone to practice with can really help you stay accountable.
Yeah, and it's just more fun to learn with other people.
Oh, absolutely. It's more motivating and you can learn from each other's mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point because making mistakes is an inevitable part of language learning.
Oh, for sure.
And it's important to not let those mistakes discourage you.
Right. It's all about embracing those mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow.
Yeah. And to remember that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers.
Exactly. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. So give yourself a break.
Be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. Exactly. I think another thing that can help with motivation is finding ways to make language learning more enjoyable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If you're not having fun, you're less likely to stick with it.
Totally. So the guide actually suggests incorporating your interests into your language learning.
Oh, okay. So how would you do that?
Well, for example, if you love music, you could listen to English songs and try to sing along.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, or if you're a movie buff, you could watch English movies with subtitles.
Okay.
And try to pick up new phrases.
So it's about finding ways to make it fun and engaging.
Exactly, because when you're enjoying yourself, you're more likely to learn and retain information.
Right. It's not a chore, it's a pleasure.
Exactly.
One thing that I've always found helpful is setting aside a specific time each day for language learning.
Oh, yeah. Routine is key.
Yeah, even if it's just for 15 or 20 minutes.
Absolutely. Consistency is more important than quantity.
Right. It's about making it a habit.
Exactly. And the guide actually recommends creating a language learning schedule.
Okay.
And sticking to it as much as possible.
So kind of treating it like an appointment.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't skip a doctor's appointment.
Right.
So why skip your English practice?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, another thing that can be really helpful is to track your progress.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Because it's easy to feel like you're not making any progress when you're learning a language, especially in the beginning.
Right, because it's a gradual process.
Yeah, so it's important to have some kind of visual reminder of how far you've come.
Totally, and the guide suggests keeping a language learning journal.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, where you can write down new words and phrases, grammar rules.
Okay.
And even just your thoughts and feelings about the learning process.
So it's kind of like a diary for your language journey.
Exactly. It's a way to document your progress and to reflect on your experiences.
And I bet it would be really motivating to look back on that journal.
Oh, for sure. It's a great way to see how much you've accomplished.
And to remind yourself of why you started learning English in the first place.
Exactly. It's all about staying inspired and keeping that end goal in mind.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I've always found helpful is to find a community of other language learners.
Oh, yeah. Community is huge.
Yeah, because it can be really isolating to learn a language on your own.
Totally. And having a supportive community can make all the difference.
Does this guide talk about the importance of community at all?
Oh, yeah. It actually dedicates a whole section to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it recommends joining online forums,
okay,
Facebook groups, meetups, like anything where you can connect with other people who are learning English.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because it gives you a chance to practice speaking with other learners.
Right.
To share tips and resources and just to encourage each other along the way.
Yeah, it's all about creating a positive and supportive learning environment.
And I think, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. It's about enjoying the journey.
Yeah. And not getting too caught up in the destination.
Exactly. It's about the process of learning and growing.
Yeah, and about connecting with other people through language.
Well said. It's all about finding those connections and building those relationships. And the guide actually goes one step further.
Okay.
And it talks about the importance of cultural exchange.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because, learning a language isn't just about learning words and grammar.
Right.
It's about understanding the culture that language comes from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it suggests things like, watching movies, listening to music, reading books that are from English-speaking cultures.
So you can kind of get a feel for the way people think and the way they interact with each other.
Exactly. It's about immersing yourself in the culture as well as the language.
And I think that can really enrich the whole learning experience.
Oh, for sure. It makes it more meaningful and more enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have. We've been through a lot.
Yeah, but I think there's one more area that I'd like to touch on before we wrap things up.
Okay, what's that?
And that's the idea of ninja level strategies.
Oh, yeah, the advanced stuff.
Yeah, once you've got a solid foundation in English, what are some things that you can do to really take your skills to the next level?
Well, this guide actually delves into some pretty interesting territory there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, one area it focuses on is mastering idiomatic expressions.
Those are tough.
Yeah, they can be tricky.
Because they don't always mean what they literally say.
Exactly. Like, for example, the phrase kick the bucket.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't actually mean to kick a bucket.
Right, it means to die.
Exactly. And those kinds of expressions can be really confusing for English learners.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get discouraged when you come across an idiom that you don't understand. Yep. But the guide actually suggests that you focus on the most common idioms that are used in everyday conversations.
Okay.
And it even provides a list of some common idioms and their meanings.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah, it's a good starting point.
So it's like having a secret decoder ring for understanding those quirky English expressions?
Exactly. It's like unlocking a whole new level of fluency.
I love that. And I think, one of the best ways to really internalize those idiomatic expressions is to actually hear them being used in context.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in movies or TV shows or in conversations with native speakers.
Yeah, that's how you really start to get a feel for how they're used naturally.
Yeah, and it can be really fun to kind of collect those idioms and try to use them yourself.
Yeah, it's like a little game.
And it can really make you sound more like a native speaker.
Oh, for sure. It adds a certain flair to your English.
Yeah, definitely. And, we've talked a lot about the importance of listening and speaking.
But what about reading? Does this guide offer any advice on how to improve your reading comprehension skills?
It does, but it goes beyond just saying read more.
Okay.
It emphasizes the importance of active reading.
Okay, so what does that actually mean?
Well, it means engaging with the text on a deeper level, not just passively scanning the words.
So it's not just about getting to the end of the page.
Right, it's about understanding and absorbing the information.
Okay, so what are some specific strategies that people can use to become more active readers?
Well, it suggests things like highlighting key phrases.
Okay.
taking notes in the margins, looking up unfamiliar words, and even summarizing what you've read in your own words.
So it's about actively thinking about the text.
Exactly.
And interacting with it.
Yeah, it's about making it your own.
I love that. And I think that's something that a lot of people overlook when they're learning a language. They just focus on reading as quickly as possible.
Right. It's about quality over quantity.
Yeah. And I think that's a good rule of thumb for language learning in general.
Absolutely.
It's not about how much you do, but about how well you do it.
Well said.
And, we've talked a lot about different skills and strategies. But I think the most important thing is just to find what works for you.
Totally. Everybody learns differently.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to experiment and to try different things until you find a method that you enjoy. Because at the end of the day, if you're not enjoying the process, you're less likely to stick with it.
Exactly. Learning should be fun.
And rewarding.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great takeaway from this deep dive.
Yeah, I agree.
It's all about finding your own path to fluency.
And embracing the journey.
Exactly. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of English fluency.
It's been a pleasure.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But I hope that everyone listening has walked away with some valuable insights and some practical tips that they can start using today.
I hope so too.
And remember, the journey to fluency is a marathon, not a sprint.
That's right.
So be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and most importantly, have fun along the way.
Well said.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those tongues wagging.